there is something freeing and also scary about taking a path that others maybe won't follow or go, whoa, that person's way out there. And I think sometimes when we have spoken to community groups or faith communities, they're like, whew, we're really glad you care about that, because when I go home at night, I don't want to be thinking about this, right? And I think that one of the things that we try and instill is that belief that we all need to care about them. This actually touches on the moral fabric of the very communities that we live in. And so that is being torn by this reality of human trafficking. If I could give one example, the county that I live in, the number one place of recruitment for human trafficking is at the schools. So it means that kids are actually being kind of bribed and whatnot and pressured by other kids to then recruit people into human trafficking.
Welcome to this week's As Unexpected podcast, when we talk to C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists about how they lead into the future when the future generally goes as unexpected. I'm Scott Marshall, your host, and my own professional experience has made me a believer that it's not how you show up when all goes as planned, but it is how you show up when things go as unplanned. Given all of their experiences, each of our guests has become very attuned to the fact that the future is not to be predicted. My hope is that this podcast can help all of you become better leaders by building the core leadership capabilities for leading in an uncertain world. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of As Unexpected. Today, I have someone who I'm only just meeting, but I have to call already as one of my heroes in the world in terms of her work. She has an incredible story and is doing tremendously impactful and important work in the world. Betty Ann, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Scott. I'm honored to be here.
Yes. If you don't mind, can you please give a little bit of background on yourself and then give our listeners a sense of your current work?
I'd be grateful to. I am a Bay Area native here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I am approaching a major birthday, 50. And so it's a time I'm probably reflecting on my life more than I normally do. But Scott, I've been involved in the anti-human trafficking efforts here in the Bay Area and beyond since the early 2000s. I would say I've worked with over 150 different anti-human trafficking organizations, and my passion is around collaboration and really getting people to work together to fight the fastest growing criminal activity in the world. And so my journey to today, we'll talk a little bit about that, but I went on semester at sea in fall of 1997, got a bachelor's from the University of Oregon in international studies and communications, and then went on to get a master's in international policy studies at Stanford University. And that landed me back here in the Bay Area. A big part of my story has been actually going into prisons like San Quentin prison and interviewing former traffickers to understand their business practices and how they think about trafficking, so that as we show up to stand for our local communities against this criminal activity, how we can understand the mind of the criminals. We are also learning just as we go about just kind of how to mobilize community members so that anyone who says, I'd like to stand against trafficking or the possibility of it happening in my neighborhood or even to my own kids or their friends, we are a big community mobilization group. It's a heavy and hard work. Like I said, I've been in it for almost 25 years. But one of my kind of fun outlets that I have enjoyed doing over the past 25 years is I've been the announcer for the Stanford women's basketball team. So I'm currently in season for my 25th season, announcing their in-stadium public address announcing. And that has been a great joy of mine and my way to combine kind of my platform of sports and played college basketball, but just really using a platform to talk to people about human trafficking and have them understand it's impacting our local communities. Just worked with the Golden State Warriors actually this past week about having their first ever human trafficking awareness evening. So that is something I'm passionate about, is kind of sometimes using the platforms we have in our lives and specifically sports to really talk to people about what's going on in their community and what they can do. That's a little bit about me.
Well, there is so much there. I just have to mention a few of our interconnections. First of all, Kirk Lacob, Executive Vice President of Operations, is a Semester C alum as well.
Great. Great.
So he's, I'm sorry, Executive Vice President of Operations for the Golden State Warriors.
I didn't know that. Okay, I definitely know the
Yeah.
name when you said it, but I did not know a semester at sea alum. Awesome.
Okay, so if you find Kirk Lacob,
Yep.
yep, you can share stories about your voyages.
That's great.
Second of all, I'm a native Oregonian. I got my PhD at the University of Oregon. So there's that connection. Eugene, a lovely place
Go Dax.
for sure. Yeah. Third, I played basketball in college too, but given you were at a D1 and I was at a D3, you were better than me for sure. But it's a great way to spend 4 years for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and no doubt. So I love everything you've said, and let's go really into the heart of your work though, because what I hear you saying is that anybody can be a victim. Number two, anybody can be someone who keeps this from happening, stops it from happening. The heart of this podcast is about how we show up when things go as we hadn't planned. And I'm guessing in your work, did you ever envision interviewing prisoners in San Quentin? I mean, how does this stuff come about? Can you share with our listeners some of the most impactful ways that things went as unexpected and how you really did show up for those around you and yourself?
Yeah, one thing I've come to learn about myself, Scott, is that when hit with kind of adversity or just even hearing about devastation, we're currently here in California really struggling with hearing of all the devastation in Southern California, just how many homes have been lost and just the amount of people affected. And so that's my heart is heavy today for that. And I really hold that. I think one of the things, as I mentioned, is my heart around human rights abuses, the whole reality of kind of learning that people were even for sale and that human trafficking exists was on an international landscape. And a lot of that was grounded from my travels to various countries. And after I graduated from college and from Stanford, I ended up actually becoming a tour manager that led alumni tours around the world. And so in my 20s and 30s, I was actually given a lot of leadership opportunities to lead people in different places. And I think travel is one of those things where you show up every day and just every day is an adventure, right? And you
Yeah.
hit adversity and your plane flight gets canceled, your passport gets stolen, somebody gets injured. These are all things that have happened to me. I was in Brazil during September 11th in 2000, and what it means to be in a leadership position there and actually trying to envision not only safety, but well-being for my group and making sure we all made it home safely. And so I think that in some ways I would say you don't just wake up one day and kind of have a strategy for like fighting human trafficking. What I did was learn about it on the international landscape and understand this was really happening, and then and how to actually kind of look at ways that we were trying to help abate the problem internationally. And then, right as I was having my eyes open to it, that's right when I started reading the newspapers here that was saying we were having different kinds of operations and discoveries that trafficking was happening in our own local communities. So, to give one vignette, in January of 2011, we were hosting a conference. We were not a nonprofit yet. We were not the Bay Area Anti-Trafficking Coalition, which is now we call ourselves Freedom Insight. But we were just 12 friends. And I was actually applying to become part of the FBI. And I thought if I really care about trafficking and happening domestically, I should go work for the FBI. And they were pursuing me because they were developing their human trafficking division. Anyway, so I was kind of doing that on the side, doing a lot of push-ups and doing all these psychological exams. And at the same time, with 12 friends, we were planning a conference that we ended up calling the Freedom Summit. And we just said, we're going to hold a weekend where we talk about trafficking happening here. We're going to have all these various stakeholders come. Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State, she ended up being one of our speakers. We had some pretty famous musicians. Sarah Groves came from the East Coast. And we ended up having, we thought a couple hundred people in a room. We'd order some sandwiches. We ended up having almost 2,000 people
Oh,
into the room
wow.
and just want to be together to understand what is trafficking and what do you mean it's happening here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Now, fast forward to where we are in 2025, we know that the 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area actually hold every form of human trafficking that has been found in the entire United States. So I actually live kind of in a place that is like a petri dish or a microcosm of the rest of the country. And so a lot of our learnings here, a lot of our best practices, I do a lot of interviewing like you do just to understand people's approaches and how they're trying to fight it. And then I actually try and bring us all together, because I say if we're siloed in this nonprofit space of all trying our own individual efforts to fight trafficking, it's like bringing Nerf guns to a war. I mean, it's just like it's the fastest growing criminal activity. Traffickers themselves are very networked through technology. And so if we can't actually come together to fight this, it's always going to be Nerf guns in a war. And so our heart around gathering those individuals was just, let's learn more about it happening here. And that very weekend that we were having that, there was actually an operation done in my hometown, a very small town here in the Bay Area. And they found an undercover brothel that had been operating for 14 years and had over 20 women that were being flown to all different places around the US for different people paying for exploitative services. And I was sitting there going, what? This is in my own hometown. And here I am up on the stage saying, we all need to believe it happens here. So from the get-go of being engaged in this issue, I think I have found it as being one, very eerily close to home, and really understanding then how do we actually help people and just maintain that centeredness ourselves to be able to understand that we're going to feel more vulnerable the closest it gets to home. And we also have to be coming back with resiliency, with empowerment. How do we teach our kids to be aware so that we don't just all tuck our heads in the sand and want to be like, oh, we're ostriches and like, it doesn't happen here. It very much does. And so that has been something that has been very true to my journey, is that it almost seems like every time I'm like, well, does it really happen? Close to home, some story, some survivor that we help, or some conversation we have about a business that has actually been like a hotel that's like, I didn't know this was happening at my hotel. All of a sudden it just is very much brought to home. So for anybody who's listening and says, well, I can kind of listen to this as like an academic or researchy topic, but it really doesn't happen where I live. I'm here to say that trafficking is happening in, every country in the world. It's not only in the large metropolitan areas, it's also in small towns. It's urban, it's rural, it's in the rich areas, poorer areas. It's, it does tend to hit us all. And so I have found that to be a very collaborative reason to get together, because nobody can say, well, I don't go to that part of town, or it's not in my neighborhood, right? So that's collaborative. And then the other piece that I would say is just my own personal journey of just keeping myself open to understanding that I need to keep learning about it. And how do I bring people along in that learning journey with me? I know a big part of the leadership model you talk about really is about curiosity, staying curious, right? So not becoming just closed down or saying, well, I know how this works. Some of the most harmful practices in fighting human trafficking have been when people have tried to make trainings and then they just stick with that for like 10 years. They keep saying the same thing. This is a crime that has been nuanced and changes, and we have to stay nimble in order to stand against it. And so our organization, Freedom Insight, that's one of the things we really stand on. And it is why I have felt the courage to go into a place like San Quentin and interview former traffickers, is because we need to keep learning. And so I'd say that is one of the things I have said all along, is as long as we can stay curious and keep understanding, more about the activity, the more we can then be strong against it and protect our communities and our kids.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program for college students and adults on career breaks, sabbaticals, or retired, interested in learning and exploring the world together. Learn more about the Lifelong Learner program at www.semesteratSea.org. There's so much in what you said. First of all, you exemplify better than I do, I think, the leadership model that I try to live into every day. You clearly have compassion. You think about the other. You talked about curiosity. You're willing to be changed by what you hear, and courage. You have the courage to take risks, to take action, to put yourself out there in uncomfortable situations. And that's what I think, when we bring those three traits together, we can move mountains. But it's hard. It's hard to bring those three together at all times. And at times I know that I fall short on one or the other or more. Let me have I'd like to get a little clearer on fastest growing criminal activity in the world, number one. How do you determine that? And when you first learned it, was it a surprise or did you say, well, of course it is? So first of all, how do you determine it? How do you measure that? And when you first learned it, what was your reaction?
I guess I'd want to put an asterisk around anytime you try and draw statistics around the human trafficking, movement. You can kind of have statistics tell you what you want them to hear, or they can just be grossly out of date the minute you say them.
Of course.
But what I would say is that there was kind of a seminal work in this area in the early 2000s by a man named Kevin Bales, and it came out that people were selling human beings, and he said, well, I believe he said over 29 million individuals in the world have been trafficked. And then that number has obviously been growing by people who have tried to measure it. And then it's kind of like who is included in that definition of human trafficking, right? It's not just sex trafficking, but it's labor trafficking of all kinds and exploitative work situations. So construction, elder care, all these areas where people are exploited and not given a proper pay, or are given no pay at all, and their documents are taken away and things like that. People's understanding of human trafficking needs to be strong, and that it's not just, as I said, exploitative sexual services. But what I would love to say on the fastest growing criminal activity is they started noticing this among just the international criminal networks that were selling guns, that then moved to selling. That's pretty dangerous, and governments are watching you, and it's this and that. And then they started selling drugs, and you could kind of put a person out on the corner. And instead of you being the one out there, you could put somebody in your place, and you could start coordinating it with cell phones, things like that. And then cash, and then Bitcoin, and all these things. Well, then it became, why sell a drug when you can only sell it once? And then you have to go back to your supplier, versus you could sell a human being over and over and over. And that is just such a horrible reality that we face, that these are individuals who are exploited multiple times a day, 7 days a week. There are no vacation or sick days. And to these individuals in these exploitative situations, they very much know that they want to get out, know that they wish, but a lot of times there is either what we would call psychological chains that are keeping them bound there. It's not as much about physical chains. It's not being, kind of bolted to your, or even handcuffed to your chair and saying you can't ever leave. It's more about, I know where your family lives. I will kill a sibling. I will do this to somebody you love. And it is those threats of violence and coercion that end up making it very hard for that individual to feel like they could ever get away. So in terms of kind of fastest growing criminal activity, we happen to know that those larger networks of criminal activity have turned to human trafficking because of the replicability of being able to sell humans over and over. But then we also know that it has picked up steam on what we would call the mom and pop local level, which is just person dating an individual at a high school and discovers, oh, wow, I could actually, I mean, I don't, I want to have some listeners know if kids are listening, obviously we want to keep this age appropriate, but, they would actually sell their girlfriend to their friends for a certain amount of money to do certain things for them. And to understand that that is not okay, and that is happening among cheerleading squads and football teams and all sorts of debate teams, and these things where people are realizing, oh, wow, if I have a bit of power over another individual, that I could actually make money off of that. And so it's a criminal activity that spans everything from just a one-off in a high school to international criminal networks that are bringing people over into illicit massage business and other businesses that are not legitimate, where they are also offering backdoor services. So it's something where it's very global and very local at the same time, which makes it very hard to fight. One of the things that I had mentioned, Scott, is one of the ways that I don't get kind of just have my eyes roll back and be like, I'm completely overwhelmed, is I really encourage people to kind of understand the framework around standing against human trafficking, right? So a sense of building your own rebar, building out your own house structure, so that when you hear a story, especially of local trafficking, or to someone or to one of your, niece's friends on a softball team, that instead of those overwhelming you or saying, well, I just won't go there anymore, or I'm not going to go to that mall, or I'm never sending my kids to that movie theater again. Instead, you hang it more on a framework of understanding the issue and kind of how you can stand against it. So one of those ways in which I do that is to take the very big issue of human trafficking, fastest growing criminal activity in the world, and I break it down into, are you somebody that is actually well equipped to stand against it from a prevention standpoint? Right? Like you're really passionate about better legislation, or you want to go out and do trainings to different industries that are affected by trafficking. Freedom Insight, my organization, happens to go into airports and hotels and apartments. And that's because the traffickers said that we need to move, work, and sleep our victims. So, where's the movement places? All sorts of transportation hubs. Where are they sleeping them? Where are they working them? That has led us into which companies we work with and try and train so that their employees know what to look for and know how to report things effectively. Then there's the people who are just want to get into the intervention. They want to go, walk what's called a blade or a strip, where they know that there are people who are held in exploitation, often have a human trafficker that is right down the street, standing on a corner, watching them, making sure they do not leave. But they want to just go in there and talk to those folks and say, there is another way, I want to help you out and all that. That is the one I recommend people, if that's your inclination, definitely get in touch with your local human trafficking task force or your local PD before you go out and try and bust down the doors. We never would encourage anyone to insert themselves to put their own personal safety at risk. And then there's also restoration, right? And kind of, what about the survivors of human trafficking, those who have come out of trafficking and said, I was held here, or this was part of my captivity, or this could help. So people will help at a volunteer at a shelter or an emergency home, where they will drive survivors to doctor's appointments, dental appointments, help them get a job, help them with potentially language skills or making a resume. So I think the issue is so big that while it can overwhelm, it can also provide a pathway for almost every single person to get engaged by who they are, how they were made to be, and just the time and effort that they can put towards it. So our first Freedom Summit that we held back in 2011 that I mentioned, we had a variety of tracks, and we said, are you a teacher? Are you a first responder? Are you a parent? Are you a pastor? Are you a someone that represents a civic community like a Rotary Club or a Kiwanis? How can you use the life that you are in to stand against trafficking right as you are? And I think that was key, because early in the days of the human trafficking movement and awareness around how to fight it, people were like, oh, wow, these are lawyers, or social workers going into international situations and then standing with victims with casework. And so I may be a nurse of 25 years, but I need to go get a law degree. And then maybe I need to go work overseas, and I'm sitting there going, no, you're a nurse of 25 years. Talk to me about the outpatient clinics that you work in. And is there any signage for people that just says, if you want to get out of the situation you're in, is someone harming you? Things like hotline numbers become very important, so that people who are in current exploitation can understand that there is a way out. And there have been all sorts of, studies and statistics, but I have heard a few that over 90% of human trafficking victims do not identify with, are you a human trafficking victim? They just know, again, their life is not as they would like it. They want to get out. They know they're being exploited. And so how do we speak the language of those who are being enslaved so that we can help them walk their own path towards freedom and accompaniment them on that, as opposed to saying we're going to somehow rescue? And that's kind of the language and where the movement is today, after 25 years of learning more about the local anti-human trafficking fight, is to say we've got to have, obviously, people in current exploitation know what their rights are and know that they can move towards freedom. And then, as I mentioned, a big passion of mine is, how do we mobilize local community members to say, gosh, what you're saying really resonates with me. And I work for, in education, or I work at a hotel, or I know somebody who works at an airport. How do I get them trained to know what to look for and how to report things? What more could I do? And so our freedominsight.org website, actually on our homepage, just says downloadable steps to action. And we put it on a continuum of time, Scott. So we look at 10 minutes, 10 days, 10 months, and we say, what's your 10, 10, 10? What can you do in 10 minutes that is like really easy. Like put the National Human Trafficking Hotline number in your phone, share with a friend, Google one thing about human trafficking in your city. Um, and then in 10 days, would you maybe think about, watching a movie about human trafficking, or attend a meeting, or think about maybe reading a book? And then in 10 months, maybe sign up to go to a conference, or sit down with your local PD, or attend a human trafficking task force meeting in your county. Those kind of things where you walk with people on then refilling those buckets of what can they do in 10 minutes, 10 days, and 10 months to fight trafficking right where they are in the very community where they live and work.
Again, so much in there. I love that you started this with saying, listen, this is such a heavy topic. Many people, if not the majority of people's initial reaction is going to be, my heart is so heavy I can't move. Mm-hmm. The just the basic concept of it is so horrific. I feel immobilized. And what you've just described, all the way up to the end with the 10-10-10, is actually you can be mobilized. Here are some very practical ways to do that. There's just great power in that. And for the audience, anybody who's traveled, you've seen signs in airports, you've seen signs on airplanes. That's just the start. We can't walk by those signs with impunity or with ignorance. We have to be aware that, just as Betty Ann shared, this is happening every day where you live. So we all have to be part of this solution for something that, I don't simplify things into good versus evil, but let's just say this is kind of like the pure evil part. This is trading in human beings. So great, powerful stuff. Thank you so much. I think this is a great transition, focusing back on you as a leader and you and your work. There's a quote from one of my favorite. He calls himself a poet, but he's almost a lyricist in some ways. So I'd like to share it with you and get your reaction, if you don't mind, Betty Ann.
Sure.
It's from Young Pueblo's Clarity and Connection, and it goes like this. Walking the uncommon path is not a certain victory, but it does provide the greatest opportunity for fulfillment.
Yes. I love that. I think there's both a global and a personal response that I have, right? I mean, that Young Pueblo's perspective there on that, actually taking the path less traveled, as those of us, who also know Robert Frost would be saying that, there is something freeing and also scary about taking a path that others maybe won't follow, or go, whoa, that person's way out there. And I think sometimes when we have spoken to community groups or faith communities, they're like, whew, we're really glad you care about that, because when I go home at night, I don't want to be thinking about this, right? And I think that one of the things that we try and instill is that belief that we all need to care about that. This actually touches on the moral fabric of the very communities that we live in. And so that is being torn by this issue, the reality of human trafficking. If I could give one example, the county that I live in, the number one place of recruitment for human trafficking is at the schools. So it means that kids are actually being kind of bribed and whatnot, and pressured by other kids to then recruit people into human trafficking, right? So for anyone who knows a young person in their life, that's scary. What about all the social media and just the way that people have friend groups online that they don't even know who are in those? And then they tell them where they are, they tell them what they're doing, they tell them what they care about. So all that way by saying that I think sometimes I feel like the path that I have chosen to try and stand against trafficking and to provide some ways for people to follow with us in that, is something of a road where people are like, whew, good for you. But the minute I turn around, I'm like, no, I'm a person that once I learn something, I'd love everybody else to follow with me. Like, the only way we're going to fight this is to have an army against it. And yes, you mentioned earlier, Scott, it is a very dark and long fight. But I think I come to work every day encouraged by the people that step up and say, I want to join you in some way. Just this last week, getting asked by the Golden State Warriors to be a part of their first ever human trafficking awareness night. That's 18,000 people in the Chase Center in San Francisco, maybe hearing for the first time that human trafficking affects where they live. Um, Invitation to be on this podcast. I mean, there are always new things coming forward where literally my journey of the last 20 years has been about people saying, what could I do? How could I join you? So I think that has been the overriding tidal wave that has helped me sustain in the midst of this. And I am a person of faith as well. And I do believe that a big issue of like standing for what you believe in, standing for who you are in this world, also involves kind of knowing what you stand for so you don't fall for everything. And like when I have found myself to be like, this is something I care about and I stand on it, even when it gets really hard, it's amazing how many people will join you because they're like, okay, like you're still at this. Like I will meet people and they're like, wow, 25 years later, you're still talking about fighting trafficking locally. You're still announcing for Stanford women's basketball. I'm like, it's because those are the things that I either bring me great joy or great fulfillment, right? So then it comes around to that second piece of what he says, which is when you are pursuing something, I never wake up and go, gosh, I wish I was like passionate about something. It's like if anything, that's not my problem. But there are other people I know have that question, right? They go to work every day and they're like, what is the passion or the purpose in my life? And I think that's a great question we all have, and we want to seek answers to. And so I think that for me, sometimes just knowing that I kind of choose a path less chosen is a way to explore some things where then we actually also come up with solutions that were never kind of achieved before. And so that is when you say I'm maybe a social entrepreneur, I'm like, it's funny. I just kind of think I'm trying to run this nonprofit and it's always a matter of, do you have enough resources to do the work you want to do? But entrepreneurship really is at my heart. And I think it is kind of saying, I'm grateful to be in a position where we have tried some things and then we have seen where we have had wind in our sails and then we continue in that direction. And a lot of that is by joining with very good people. It is by knowing what I stand for and what I believe. And then also just kind of like when adversity comes, trusting that that can actually be a trajectory changer, but not ender. And so here we are, 14 years into our nonprofit. We've held 3 freedom summits. We ended up creating an interactive human trafficking exhibition that can go to summer festivals and county fairs so that people who are kind of just showing up to have a good time are actually also like, oh, wow, I didn't realize this happens where I live. We've done more to go out to where people are with talking about this issue, as opposed to maybe hosting one event that you have to have people come to if they know they're interested. So taking down those barriers to entry, having people understand it is happening in their local communities, and then offering a blueprint for how communities can say, man, we want to cast a vision for freedom being in sight for the most individuals in our community as possible. Help me know how to do that. And so, like I said, we continue to learn as we go. But I'm very passionate about, well, I guess I would say the compassion that comes up is not only learning about the suffering happening in our communities, but asking ourselves how we can be part of the solution. So I joked that when I was younger, I would almost like say, oh, I got to create my CV or what's going to be my next job or where am I headed? And it was like, I actually stopped asking myself what I was good at. And I started asking myself what keeps me up at night. And just being like, man, if I step into that, and that is where I have seen the most encouragement, blessing in my life, where people have come along with me. And so I would say my definition of having compassion for an issue is not just empathy around the suffering, but it is actually that you might see a glimmer of hope or a path about how you could be part of the solution.
Yeah. This has been amazing. I opened up this by saying we had just gotten to know each other and you're already a hero. And after this 30 minutes, you are definitely a hero of mine. I'm going to right away go start to look at the 10-10-10. I'm going to get the anti-trafficking number on my phone. Everybody on this podcast listening, do the same. We all have to be part of the solution. As Betty Ann said, it's going to take a village. It's actually going to take all villages to get this done. Betty Ann, thank you so much for your time. I love your work, and I'm so impressed with what you've done in the few years that it's been brought to the forefront. So thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll be in touch soon again.
I look forward to that. Thanks, Scott.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program where students visit 10 countries on 3 continents, all while taking 3 to 4 college classes through Colorado State University. See course offerings and upcoming voyage itineraries at www.semesteratsea.org. Thank you for joining this week's episode of the As Unexpected podcast. The viewpoints and opinions of featured guests do not necessarily represent those of the Institute for Shipboard Education or Semester at Sea. Hit the like button, share it with your colleagues, family, and friends, and remember, be curious, be compassionate, be courageous. That's what it takes to lead as unexpected.